Dr. David Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We on this side of the House have indicated from the Labor Party that we will be supporting this bill. Markets are powerful institutions. They make excellent servants and terrifying masters. And of course, the open flow of capital has beneficial effects where countries benefit from trade, but it can also have detrimental effects where markets are exposed and where some countries struggle to compete, where they haven't found their comparative advantage and maximise that benefit. We need strong international institutions in order to encourage the kind of trade from which we will all benefit. We are a global society, and increasingly all of our futures are intertwined. This region is no different. When China sneezes, the US stock markets catch a cold. And so our future prosperity is dependent on our neighbours doing well and us doing well also. That has effects, that prosperity in our region has effects in terms of security, liberty and peace. Prosperity itself creates the conditions for strengthening and maintaining the rule of law. And it's a virtuous cycle, which of course then is a key plank in prosperity itself. And I think that the path to reducing inequalities is part of creating a more prosperous society. We know that societies with low inequalities have higher social mobility. And in those societies, there's less suspicion that the rule of law is there to protect the interests of a favoured few. And so there is less likely to be civil unrest in countries with lower inequalities and higher social mobility. And so we in New Zealand have a part to play in creating a world with strong institutions that supports those countries that are struggling in the global economy, both to introduce prosperity and from that really the more important thing, which is a country that people would want to live in, that has security, liberty and peace. The prosperity of nations is built on the infrastructure that everyone needs, but very few people can afford on their own. And when I say this, I think of things like hospitals, schools, clean running water, roads, police forces and courts that are beyond corruption. And the principle of fair and equitable access to those institutions, to that infrastructure, is critical to social justice and also to the success economically of nations. And so here we have the AIIB, which is going to contribute a little bit to that picture through investing in infrastructure in economies, in developing economies. And these institutions that provide the reasonable financial stability that nations need ensure that the opportunities for growth that free capital flows bring are more likely to be grasped, and also, I guess, in that they give the confidence that when economies are open, not just will they have the opportunity for the growth, but they will be somewhat protected from the downsides of globalisation, that those effects will be mitigated against, Mr. Speaker. This legislation and this bank, investment bank, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, is not without risks. And we read in the report that has been provided from the negotiators meeting, adapted from the negotiators meeting, the report of the Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade Committee, that there are many risks ahead. And some of them are, of course, risks that any new institution might face. There's a learning process with any new institution. People have to find their roles. Countries have to find their roles within this. And those risks, though, should not stop us wanting to support something that is genuinely good for the world, that we hope will reduce inequality, that will begin to address problems of climate change and other environmental and social impacts. And some of these things are listed in the paper. And and very clearly outlined the risks, the kinds of things that they would want to achieve with the bank. The environmental and social safeguards draft policies, I quote, outlines an approach to identify and manage environmental and social risks. The formulation and implementation of environmental and social management plans for each AIIB operation, and ongoing monitoring and project cost evaluation. These are all things, of course, we would wish to support. And the policy covers, I quote, biodiversity, sustainable land use, climate change, greenhouse gas emissions, gender, working conditions, community health and safety, child labour and forced labour. These are all things that we would like to see progress on, not just in our own country, but across the Asia region. And we recognise that with that stability, with the implementation of those ideals, comes prosperity, not just for those countries, but also for neighbouring countries. We all benefit from a safer, fairer world where all have access to justice, where all feel they have a stake and can make a contribution, where people do not feel excluded from participating in the economy and from justice. So Labor supports this legislation that will enable the government to become a member of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and we are pleased that the government is taking these steps. There is, of course, a somewhat comical aspect to this, and that various members of the House, well, comical, I use that kind of reluctantly, because it would be comical were it not so serious. The Future Investment Fund, we're told, is where this money is coming from. But that is money that has already been spent on a variety of other projects by this government. We know this fund is a mythical pot of money that the government has created. First, it was going to pay down huge amounts of debt from it, but we find that this government has borrowed more debt than the government of Muldoon. It's now $100 billion in debt, and that debt has been growing year by year. This is a government that has continued to borrow, and yet it said initially that this future investment fund would pay down debt. Well, sir, I return to the point, which is that we're told this contribution that we're making, this $92 million to the bank, will be paid for out of the future investment fund, and I am questioning whether that is indeed possible, given that this fund has been spent on so many different things, including the roof of the Beehive building. The roof of the Beehive building has come out of that. We were told it was going to be for schools and hospitals and other infrastructure that would help our prosperity in the future. But it is also paid for compliance for tax legislation, for repairs to Te Papa, to fund the census, to fund, I mean, for goodness sake, these are things out of this future investment fund. It has been spent many times over, and my colleagues have drawn attention to this. It's magic money that can be spent again. David Parker listed the likes of Kiwibank receiving funding from it, Chris Finlayson buying memorials out of it, and Auckland Transport, Canterbury Rebuild, you name it, the Future Investment Fund has been labelled as the source of this magic money. So here we have a $92 million contribution. We on the Labor Party think that this is a useful thing to be investing in. We need stronger financial institutions in the world if we are all going to capture the benefits of flows of capital. We need to have this kinds of strong institutions that give countries confidence to participate in global markets, that give them the confidence that there is some level of security, that there will be investment should their economies stumble, in the kinds of infrastructure that builds economies over time. Mr. Speaker, we will be supporting this bill. And we want to see stronger international institutions to support economies in the interests of prosperity, in the interests of fairness, and in the interests of creating a better world.
Mr. Speaker.